Hi friends, Tracy here from the Sewing Channel. Are you ready to capsule quilt? What is it? You know I made that up, right? I've had this idea in my head 2 years now, and I finally went and did it. I made my first capsule quilt. Friends, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 kids. So far, I only have one Josephine. Now you do the math. Capsule quilting is simple. You find a timeless quilt pattern for a baby quilt. You make it for the future, your future grandchild. Now mind you, it can be a future niece, nephew, a future wedding. It can be a future anybody. For me, it all came down to one thing. I want all of my grandchildren to have a quilt made by me. Enough talking already. Let's you and me get busy capsule quilting. I grabbed a bunch of light to medium gray fat quarters out of my stash, and I grabbed a bunch of random colored scraps out of all of my scrap bins. Oh my word, I have so much. I decided to use my die cutting machine today that I have. And since I was going to need a bunch of half square triangles, this machine was going to work out perfectly for me. No worries if you don't have a die cut machine like me. All you need to do is simply cut out your triangles and make half square triangles at unfinished 3.5 inches. Let me show you how this die cut machine works. It's this little piece of thin metal that when pressure is put to the metal on top of the fabric, it actually cuts out the pieces that you need. You simply sandwich those pieces together, your fabric and the die cut, and you put them through this pressure machine. Pressing from both the top and the bottom is how it works. It comes out the other end, and when it's done, you lift it all up and you have these perfectly cut triangles. And you can get them in all different shapes too. I'll put a link down below in the info box if anyone's looking for a die cut machine like this. I don't really use my die cutting machine that often, but when I do, I'm really glad I did. As a side note, when using a die cut like this, there are absolutely no dog ears that you have to trim off after you've squared everything up. Every quilter should have one of these. It's a color wheel. After sewing all of my triangles together, I had a rainbow of colors. I followed the sequence that is on the color wheel. If I started with red, then I went orange, yellow, green, and so on. Here was my first layout that I tried with all of my half square triangles. I liked it, but I tried this one and I like this one better. So I decided on this. One side tip that I'm going to give you is to totally take a picture of this before you start sewing because things can get totally mixed up all over the place. Trust me, I had to unpick more than a few times on this quilt. I made sure that my workflow was a sequence of the quilt behind me and grabbing it, sewing a couple together, making a little block, and then putting it back up on my design wall right behind me. When I wasn't paying attention, I would put it back up on my design wall upside down and then sew those together. Oh, it was very irritating. So as you can imagine, I referenced my picture on my phone many times during the assembly of these half square triangles. Half square triangles are so much fun. You could totally make all kinds of different patterns with them. I'm loving how this quilt top is ending up. Now on to the borders. Since I have so many strip scraps, I went with a racer stripe border. I love those type of borders. My gray strip was about 2.5 inches wide, and then I just added those 1.25 inch strips, random in length, all down the sides of the gray strip. I wanted all 4 sides of my quilt top to have a racer stripe border. To make my baby capsule quilt even more special, I went with round corners, and I just took a Pyrex bowl out of my kitchen and took my erasable ink and just curved it around. And I took my curved ruler just to blend those lines in so it went into a very nice curve. I did fold that in half first too, so I have 2 round corners now, and then I'm going to fold them in the opposite direction and use the first round corner as my template, so to speak.
So you should end up with 4 nicely rounded corners. I just love round corners. And I've been wall basting lately. I don't know, I just find that it's been easier. So I used my 505 and I spray basted the quilt top to the batting. And the batting is clipped up there, you can't tell, but it is. The main tip I can give you on wall basting is that you need to really utilize the palms of your hand to spread everything out. And you really do want to make sure that that batting is nice and flat up against the wall. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of puckering that you are not going to like when you start to free motion quilt. Speaking of free motion quilting, I did some simple loopy lassos all over. They were big lassos and small lassos, and it was just a meander all over this entire quilt. And of course, I had to put a special touch on this particular quilt. I love you already, Mimi. Before I add the backing to any of my quilts, I always check the back to make sure that all spots are filled in with the free motion quilting. For the gray strip border, I decided on a wishbone. Now, I'm not that good at wishbones just yet, but I do think they turned out pretty cute for not really doing them all the time. Now it was time to trim everything up, get all that excess batting off. For the backing on my capsule quilt, I decided on this already cut plush 1.5 yard fleece from Walmart, and I have to tell you, it is super soft. It really is. Lay your plush and your quilt top wrong sides together, and then pin all along the edge only, and then sew and tack down about 1/8 of an inch in from that edge, and tacking both layers together. Let me make it plain for you on this sample. So you can see there I've already tacked the 2 pieces together. Then I'm going to have 1 inch coming off from the quilt top. I'm going to fold over once and then fold over again and clip. And that is how I'm going to bind this quilt. Let me show you this hack that I utilized on today's project. You see the problem right there. You see that fur coming up through the middle of the presser foot or the walking foot? That fur gets caught underneath either side of the presser foot in the center there, and that's no good. It holds us up. So take the blue tape, it doesn't have very much sticky to it, attach it just like you see me do there, and now watch this. When we set it back down, it just glides perfectly and it doesn't get caught in the center of the presser foot. Problem fixed, totally. When using this technique, you need to make sure that the fur is constantly pushed toward the middle of the quilt as you are sewing and tacking down that wraparound binding. When the binding is done, then I simply just go around the quilt, pinning in different spots and tack them down with my sewing machine about 1 inch or so. I'm pretty sure that I have created a quilt monster in my Josephine. She really wanted this quilt, and I felt kind of bad taking it back from her, but when I was holding it up, she was literally playing tug of war with me. Now you probably all are wondering, did she really bury this quilt in the yard? When I first thought of capsule quilting, I thought of how they bury those treasures and have people like open them in 20 years from now. But to answer the question, nah, I didn't bury the quilt in the yard. If you really do want a chance to win some of my free sewing channel merch, then you must read what that white box says. I also have all of the rules down in the info box just below this video. Now go email me this secret word on the screen right now, and be sure to come back here and click on one of these videos that's on the screen so we can continue learning together. Until next time on the Sewing Channel, take care.